And this is the other person who's indicted in this case. This is Walt Nauta. And here are his crimes. And his crime is in bold twice, where he is in an interview. It's a voluntary interview with the FBI. He's served in the Navy. He's supposed to know it's a crime to lie in this discussion. And he's asked, this is a guy who's been moving the boxes. He knows exactly where they are. He's been delivering them to Trump's office and all that stuff. He knows which one Trump is looking at today. So he says this when they say to him, do you have any information that could help us understand, like, where they were kept, how they were kept, where they were secured, were they locked? You know, something that makes the intelligence community feel better about these things, you know? And he says, I wish I could tell you. I don't know. I honestly just don't. This is the guy, this is the box guy. Yeah. Like, his whole life has been the boxes for the last couple of months. Yeah. The final question to him, so that sentence is in bold, because that's a crime. The final sentence is so you didn't know, you have no idea how they got there before. And he says no, and the word no is bolded because that too is his crime. And I just want to encourage the audience, that's how easy this thing is legally and to read.
He'll be selling bound copies of it on
We're actually doing an audiobook version.
Well, of course you, an industrious man that you are. Page 8, you see the agencies that have information that's been compromised here. This is not the PTA. This is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That's analysis of imagery intelligence, and geospatial information in support of national security objectives. The Department of Energy in terms of nuclear deterrent information. The Department of State and Bureau of Intelligence and Research. This is serious information. And I go back to Walt Nauta, who is the only other person named in this. And at once, it's the mendacity is so flagrant. It's hard to have pity for this person. At the same time,
I've got a fair.
No, and knowing firsthand some of the people who work, these Navy guys who work as aides to the president, who work as valets, who work as body men, this is the honor of a lifetime for them. And the way in which I can only presume Donald Trump took advantage of this man's allegiance to his president, and the fact that he was willing to lie so flagrantly to Department of Justice investigators is an American tragedy.
And by the way, there is a moment in this document where they talk about Donald Trump having a phone call with Walt Nauta for about 29 seconds, after which he moves boxes. They're told on May 11th, there's a subpoena, you got to give him back. Corcoran says, give him back. Walt Nauta is the one who does these moves from May. He does them on May 24th. He moves 3 of them. May 31st, he moves another 50. June 1st, he moves 11 more. June 2nd, he moves 30 more. And then in July, the FBI and the grand jury obtained and reviewed surveillance video from the Mar-a-Lago club showing the movement of boxes. And so Donald Trump, and I think in all things large and small, Donald Trump's habit, like a mob boss, is to get someone like Walt Nauta to do the dirty work for him. He's instructing him before each of these movements of boxes, including him talking to some woman who could be Melania or maybe could be Ivanka. We were debating it earlier. And he's told, you know what, there's not enough room on the plane because we're going to put for all these boxes to go to Bedminster. And he's like, oh, no, he's going to go through them. He's not going to want the whole box. He is the one communicating and physically moving the boxes. He's caught on tape. And then he's the one interviewed by the FBI and lies. This guy, I mean, it's hard not to feel a bit of pity for him because he's the little guy. Trump obviously is paying his legal bills, but he faces the exact same consequences as somebody who is so rich and had so much power.
The two men are going to be in a courthouse standing next to each other like the Home Alone burglars on Tuesday morning.
That's an additional legal problem for Donald Trump, because if he were a standalone defendant, I actually think he'd be in a better position.
Yes, he doesn't have someone to
when and if sentencing comes around. Because this guy, people have gone to prison for what this guy has done.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea that, like, well, there is no principle that says, oh, no, you can't convict a Navy veteran of a crime. You know, all of this kind of mythology that surrounds the notion of convicting a former president. So I actually think them having a co-defendant in there who is, by all previous, legal precedent, completely vulnerable to serious criminal sentencing here is actually very helpful.
Rachel, what do you think about that we have two defendants here? And just the story told through this indictment of this individual essentially being recruited into a criminal conspiracy. not the only one Donald Trump tries to recruit into a criminal conspiracy. He basically attempts to do the same with his lawyer, who's deft enough to extricate himself. We'll get to that in a moment. But the fact that that's part of the story in this indictment as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a really astute point by Lawrence that you know, in every jury considering a case like this, you know, they're taught about precedent, they're taught about light crimes, they're taught about, you know, the seriousness of the offense and all of those things over the course of their participation in it. But when they're looking at somebody like Walt Nauta, who isn't going to have, you know, the world rising up and saying that it's the death of the republic if he's convicted of something, if he's plainly guilty of something, that's going to make it harder to say that Mr. Nauta ought to be convicted and Mr. Trump shouldn't because of something else mystical about him that makes him a different kind of citizen. I think that's a really astute point by Lawrence. I will also just say, you know, I know in our earlier coverage there was some discussion as to whether or not Mr. Nauta might feel like he wanted to plead guilty, like he might want to cooperate, like he might want to not be on the at the sharp end of this stick any longer. I think it may be heretical for me to say it, and everybody can shout me down, but I think we should also talk about the possibility that Donald Trump might plead. Donald Trump is looking at decades and decades and decades in prison. And this indictment is very straightforward and not complicated and doesn't leave a lot out. And it tells you very much what they've got to use against him. I mean, if it were you, would you consider pleading guilty to this in exchange for lenience?
Yesterday.
I might.
Yesterday.
Yeah. And we're not really contending with that.